Welcome back and let's continue. So now we're going to look at distance. Distance is the length of a path or route traveled. For example, the distance between Johannesburg in Gauteng and Polokwane in Limpopo is 315 kilometers. So, a car travels at a speed of 105 kilometers per hour for 3 hours. What distance did the car travel? Do you know the formula for distance? There's our triangle to help us. Distance is equals to, yes, speed multiplied by time. What was the speed given to us? 105. We are multiplying that by 3. What is 105 multiplied by 3? Yes, it is 315 kilometers. So that will be the unit for our speed. Let's look at the rate for this example. We've got time is to distance. In 3 hours, the distance traveled was 315 kilometers. So when simplified, 1 hour is 105 kilometers. So this means that in every hour, we travel for 105 kilometers. So 105 kilometers per hour. Let's look at another example. So, a car travels at a speed of 120 kilometers per hour for 3 hours. What distance did the car travel? Do you remember the formula again for distance? There's our triangle, just in case you need help remembering. The distance is speed multiplied by time. Our speed given is 120 kilometers. We are multiplying that with 3 hours. Do you have the answer? 120 multiplied by 3. Yes, it is 360 kilometers. So, let's look at the rate here. Distance is to time. In 3 hours, it was traveled 360 kilometers. In 1 hour, that was 120 kilometers. So, that is 120 kilometers for every hour. Or we can just say 120 kilometers per hour. Let's compare our two examples. So here, what happened is that we increased our speed. So when we increased our speed, what happened to our distance? So our distance also increased. Now, that means that the faster you go, the more distance covered in a certain period of time. Do you remember what that means? That means that speed and distance are directly proportional. When the one quantity increases, the other quantity also increases. So, looking at our concept map again, we have looked at time, speed, and distance. Now we move over to looking at finance, the exchange rate, interest, simple interest, and compound interest. Let's look at exchange rate. So remember what that is? The number of units of a foreign currency that are bought to 1 unit of the local currency, or vice versa. So an example of this is that at some point in 2022, $1 was equals to 18 rands and 1 cent. So $1 is equals to 18 rand and 1 cent. That's the exchange rate we are going to use in this example. So from this exchange rate, we can calculate the value of different amounts. For example, $12 is equals to 216 rands and 12 cents. So the exchange rate in America for $1 is 18 rand and 1 cent. How much in South African rands will you have if you have $12? So we find the amount of rands as follows. Remember that $1 is to 18 rands and 1 cent. So how do we get to $12? Remember, because we're working with a rate, we need to work with multiplication. So from $1, I multiplied by 12 on the left-hand side. This means that I have to go now and multiply by 12 on the right-hand side. So you take your calculator, you say 18,01, and you multiply that by 12. So what answer do we get? Yes, you are correct. 216 rands and 12 cents. Okay? Let's look at interest. Do you remember what interest is? A fee paid for borrowing money or money received from an investment. For example, when the bank charges 900 rands for borrowing money from them. Let's look at an example. Thuli paid an overall price of 13,400 for the laptop, but The laptop costs 12,500 rands. The extra amount is the interest. Calculate the amount of interest that Thuli paid. So how do we calculate what interest she paid? We are going to look at the total repayments minus the purchase price. So, how much? What was the total repayments that Thuli paid? We were given that the overall price is 13,400 rands. So, that is 13,400 rands minus the amount that the laptop cost, which was 12,500 rands. This means that the interest, yes, if you've already calculated that, well done, it is 900 rands. Let's move on. Let's now look at simple interest. So simple interest is when interest is calculated for a number of years on the original amount without the interest being accrued on interest. For example, so Chantal deposits 3,000 rand in the bank. The bank will give her an interest of 7% per annum, that means per year, for 3 years on simple interest. What is the total amount she has in the bank after the 3 years? So let's look at how this simple interest is calculated. So for year number 1, we have 3,000 multiplied by 7%, and that is 210 rands. For year number 2, we have the same 3,000 rands multiplied by 7%, and that still gives us 210 rands. Then we have year number 3, which is 3,000 rand multiplied by 7%, and that is still 210 rands. Remember, the interest is calculated on the original amount. So, what is this total interest? So, that is the interest in total. We are going to add the interest for year number 1, year number 2, and year number 3. So if I say 210 plus 210 plus 210 rands, that will give me 630 rands. And that is the total interest that was earned. But if we are talking about the total amount that Chantal will have in her bank account, that is the original 3,000 rands that she had in the bank, and we are going to add the total amount of money that she has gained interest, and that will give us a total answer of 3,630. And remember, if we are looking at the rate for this question, so if we are looking at the rate for this question, we are now comparing the interest with the period. And the interest that was gained within these 3 years is 630 rand. So that is 630 rand is to 3 years. But if we are going to simplify that rate, we now have 210 rands is to 1 year. That gives us a rate of 7% every year, or we can just say 7% per annum. So let's see how we can simplify this. So we're going to look at the same example. Chantal deposits 3,000 rand in the bank account. The interest is still simple interest, 7% for 3 years. Calculate the total amount that she will have in the bank. So for us to calculate this amount, we are going to have a formula. This formula is going to be based on the letters A, P, I, and N. So A represents the amount after the interest is earned. So this is our total amount. The P will represent the principal amount invested. So this is the initial amount that Chantal has. The I will represent the interest rate per annum, and the N is the period of the investment. We have all this information. So let's use our formula. Our formula is A is equals to P, open bracket, 1 plus I multiplied by N. Remember, we said we have all this information. The only one we don't have is the total amount after the interest is earned. So in the place of P, we are going to put in the principal amount, which was 3,000. The I that we were given, that is our interest rate. Now remember, our interest rate, the 7% is 7 hundredths. Do you remember that? So that is how we are going to represent it in our formula. Then we are also going to multiply by our period, which is our n, so we are going to multiply by 3. You can use your calculator to have the answer, but you will see that the answer is the same one that we got from the previous example of 3,630. So this formula makes things easier for us, so we don't have to go and calculate each interest for each year. Finally, let's look at compound interest. Compound interest is an interest earned in 1 year that is added to the original amount and the interest for the following year calculated from the new amount. So this means that unlike the simple interest, this interest is calculated every time there is a new amount in your bank account or in your investment. So for example, 7% interest is 675 rands and 13 cents earned on 3,000 over 3 years. Let's talk about Nicholas. Nicholas deposits 3,000 in the bank. The bank will give her an interest of 7% per annum, right? So for 7% per annum for 3 years on compound interest. So let's see how the interest is calculated for Nicholas on compound interest. In the first year, we have 3,000 rands and 7% of that is 210 rands. In the second year, we are no longer calculating the 7% on the 3,000 rands. Remember, Nicholas received 210 rands from the first year. So now his total amount is 3,210 rands. We are going to calculate 7% of that new amount. And that interest is calculated to be 224 rands and 70 cents. In the third year, what happens? That 224 rands is now added into the account again. We have 3,434 rands and 70 cents. And when we calculate 7% of that, it gives us 240 rands and 43 cents. So, how much interest did Nicholas receive? We are going to add these interests there. And how much do you get? Yes, it is 675 rands and 13 cents. So what is the total amount that Nicholas has in his bank account? So the total amount, remember, he originally had 3,000 rands. Now we are adding the interest that he received, which is 675 rands and 13 cents. And that gives us a total of 3,675 rands and 13 cents. Let's look at the rate. So the rate here is just 7% every year, and that's 7% per annum. Let's move on to the next slide. So again, let's look at a simpler way to calculate this compound interest. Nicholas deposits 3,000. We're still dealing with Nicholas, 7% per annum, and that is for 3 years. So let's calculate the total amount that he will have in the bank. Again, we are still using the same variables to represent in this formula, but this formula is different from the one of simple interest. Here we have A is equals to P, open bracket, 1 plus I, we close the bracket, and exponent n. So that's where the difference is, the exponent n. But let us calculate. A, and remember, A is the amount after the interest is earned, is equals to P. Do you remember what P is? That's our initial amount, our principal amount. So that is our 3,000 rands. And then we open the bracket, 1 plus our I, which is our interest rate. Do you remember how we represent our interest rate? That is 7 hundredths. We're going to close that bracket, and then in the place of n, which is in the exponent, we are going to put in the 3, which is for 3 years. Right? And as it is, as you've written it down, you are going to punch it into your calculator. And when you punch it into your calculator, you are going to find a final answer of? Yes, you have it, 3,675 rands and 13 cents. So that's it from today's lesson. I really hope you enjoyed the lesson just as much as I did, and I hope to see you next time. Goodbye.